The last photo my daughter-in-law posted before I woke up from surgery was her smiling by a pool in Cabo. The last text my son sent me was, "Get well soon." What I found in his car the next morning made me wish I never woke up at all. Stick around, subscribe when you're done. Chapter 1 starts now. I woke up to the sound of a heart monitor beeping somewhere on my left, and the smell of antiseptic so strong it burned my nose. My mouth tasted like rubber gloves, and my throat felt like someone had scraped it with sandpaper. For a few seconds, I didn't know where I was. The ceiling tiles gave it away eventually. Hospital. I was in a hospital room, and something had been cut out of me, and I was 67 years old and tired in a way that felt permanent. Like the tiredness had settled into my bones while I was under anesthesia and decided to stay. My son Eric sat in the plastic chair beside my bed with his phone in his hands, and his thumb scrolling like his life depended on it. He didn't look up when I moved, not a glance, not a smile, just scrolling. His wife Vanessa stood near the window taking photos of her own reflection in the glass. I watched her tilt her head and pout her lips and snap picture after picture like the room was a backdrop for her personal brand, instead of a place where her mother-in-law was recovering from surgery. She turned sideways, checked her hair. Took another one. I tried not to judge. Younger people lived differently now. Everything had to be documented. Every meal, every outfit, every hospital visit, even the ones that weren't about them. Even the ones where someone else was lying in a bed with a tube in her arm. I asked Eric if he locked the house before he came. He nodded without looking up from the screen. "Yeah, Mom, everything's fine." Vanessa didn't even turn around. I closed my eyes and let the medicine pull me back under because arguing felt like too much work. The surgery went well, the doctors said. Something about my gallbladder, something about infection. I stopped listening after they said I'd recover quickly. 3 more days in the hospital, and I could finally go home. Home meant the little Arizona house I bought with my husband Daniel 41 years ago. The kitchen where he drank his coffee black every morning, standing by the sink in his bathrobe. The hallway where Eric took his first steps and fell on his diaper and laughed instead of crying. The bedroom where I held Daniel's hand while cancer took him inch by inch over 9 months that felt like 9 minutes and 9 years at the same time. Some people inherit money from their parents. I inherited memories. That's all Daniel left me besides the house. Memories and one small wooden jewelry box. And inside the top drawer of my bedroom dresser sat the most important memory of all. My mother's diamond ring. Old-fashioned, heavy gold band. Surrounded by tiny emeralds that caught the light like green fire. Not flashy enough for modern tastes, not big enough to impress anyone on Instagram, but priceless to me. My mother wore it through poverty and childbirth and chemo, and every bad thing life threw at her for 47 years of marriage. Before she died, she placed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it and whispered, "Promise me this stays in the family." Her voice was barely there. Her hands were cold. I kept that promise for 23 years. I never wore the ring because I was too afraid offlosing it. I just opened the drawer sometimes and looked at it, touched the emeralds, remembered her hands. I had no idea someone else already broke that promise. While I was lying there with a tube in my arm and a heart monitor beeping, and my son scrolling through his phone like nothing mattered at all. 3 days later, Eric drove me home from the hospital. I remember gripping the car door handle the whole time because every bump in the road pulled at my stitches and made me gasp. Vanessa sat in the back seat, scrolling through her phone with the brightness turned all the way up like a little flashlight aimed at her face. She didn't ask if I was comfortable, didn't ask if I needed anything. Just scrolled and tapped and scrolled some more. The sun was setting behind the Arizona mountains, and I just wanted to walk into my house and feel normal again. Feel like myself. But the second Eric helped me through the front door, something was wrong. I felt it before I saw it. The house smelled different. Not dirty exactly, just not mine. Like expensive perfume mixed with Chinese takeout and maybe vanilla candles and something else I couldn't name. Something that didn't belong. Vanessa rushed past me with her arms open like she was welcoming me to my own home. "Oh my God, Patricia, sit down, don't overwork yourself." Her voice was loud and sweet like she was performing for someone, maybe herself. Eric carried my overnight bag upstairs without saying a word, and I walked slowly through the living room holding the wall for support because my legs still felt shaky. The family photos on the fireplace mantel were not in the same order anymore. I noticed that right away because I dust those frames every week. The one of Daniel and me at our wedding used to be in the center. Now it was pushed to the far end behind a candle. The one of Eric in his Little League uniform was turned slightly sideways like someone picked it up and put it back without caring which direction faced out. The cabinet door near the kitchen hung open a crack like someone rummaged through it and forgot to close it all the way. Even the air felt unfamiliar, like someone else had been living here while I was gone. Like my home had become a rental, I told myself I was being paranoid. Surgery messes with your head. Anesthesia makes you see things that aren't there. My friend Carol warned me about that. She said after her hip replacement, she thought her neighbor was stealing her mail for 3 weeks. So I took a breath and made myself stop looking for problems. Eric came back downstairs and asked if I wanted tea. I said yes. Vanessa disappeared into the guest bathroom, and I heard her running water and humming some song I didn't recognize. I sat in my recliner and closed my eyes and tried to feel grateful. But then I walked into my bedroom later that night to find my pajamas, and I noticed something that stopped my heart. The top drawer of my dresser was not fully closed. It was open about ½ inch. I never leave that drawer open. Ever. For 41 years, I have kept that drawer closed because it holds the things I value most: my mother's ring, Daniel's watch, the necklace Eric gave me for my 50th birthday. My stomach tightened so hard I felt my stitches pull and a small sharp pain shot through my side. I walked toward the drawer slowly, calmly, like approaching a sleeping animal. I opened it. Empty. The wooden jewelry box was gone. Not moved to another drawer, not sitting on the nightstand. Gone. For a few seconds, my brain refused to understand what my eyes were seeing. I checked again, ran my fingers along the bottom of the drawer like the box might be hiding under a shirt. Nothing. I checked the drawer below it, then the one below that, then the nightstand, then the bathroom counter, then the closet shelf. Nothing, nothing, nothing. My hands started shaking. Not from surgery, from something worse. I called out for Eric. My voice came out quieter than I expected. He appeared in the doorway with a confused look on his face. "What's wrong, Mom?" "My jewelry box," I said. He frowned immediately, but it wasn't a worried frown. It was something else, something faster. "What jewelry box?" he asked. I stared at him, the wooden one from my dresser. He shrugged, and it was the smallest shrug I've ever seen, but it told me everything. "Maybe you moved it before surgery," he said. "No," I said. Vanessa suddenly appeared behind him like she had been listening from the hallway. "Oh, Patricia, after anesthesia, people forget things all the time." She smiled. It was a tight smile. A smile that didn't reach her eyes. Forget things. I felt heat rise into my chest. Inside that box was my wedding ring, my mother's necklace, old anniversary earrings, and the heirloom diamond ring with the emeralds. The only thing I truly cared about in this world besides my son. That night I couldn't sleep. At 2:13 in the morning, I opened Instagram on my phone, and there it was. Vanessa smiling beside a private resort pool in Cabo San Lucas, champagne in her hand, designer sandals on her feet. A caption underneath the photo that said "much needed luxury, escape" with a red heart emoji. The photo had been posted yesterday, while I was still in the hospital with a tube in my arm and a fresh wound in my side. The next morning, I said nothing. I made coffee with shaking hands and drank it standing in the kitchen, watching the sun come up over the mountains. I watered my plants like I did every morning. The fern Daniel bought me 30 years ago. The orchid Eric gave me for Mother's Day. The little succulent on the windowsill that refuses to die no matter how many times I forget to water it. I watched Eric laugh at something on his phone while Vanessa talked to a friend about beach resorts and swimsuit shopping and whether they should book the spa package. They were planning another trip, right there in front of me. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt afraid of my own family. Not scared like a jump scare in a movie. Scared like a deep, cold knowing that something has broken and you don't know if it can ever be fixed. Later that afternoon, Eric asked if I needed anything from the grocery store. I said yes, just to get him out of the house. The second his truck pulled out of the driveway, I walked into the garage. His car keys hung on a hook by the door to the house. He always leaves them there, always has. I didn't know what I was looking for. Only that mothers know when someone is lying. We know it in our chests before we know it in our heads. I opened the driver's door of his sedan and sat sideways in the seat because my stomach still hurt. Inside the center console, I found gum wrappers and loose change and an old pair of sunglasses with a scratched lens and napkins from fast food places and one folded piece of paper that looked like a receipt. I pulled it out. Desert Valley Pawn and Gold Exchange. The name was printed in blue letters at the top. My fingers went numb. I unfolded the paper and read the rest. Item sold vintage diamond ring with emerald setting. 14-karat gold band. Approximately 1.2 carats total diamond weight. Condition good. Sale date 2 days after my surgery. My eyes scanned down to the bottom. Amount paid to seller $48,000. Patricia's fingers went numb. My mother's entire life reduced to a transaction receipt. A piece of paper with a barcode and a date stamp and a signature I didn't need to see because I already knew whose it was. But I looked anyway. Seller name Eric Coleman. Not Vanessa, my son, the boy I raised alone after Daniel died. The boy who cried for an hour because he accidentally stepped on a bird when he was 7 years old. The boy who held my hand at his father's funeral and promised to take care of me. He walked into that pawn shop. He handed my mother's ring to a stranger behind a counter. He watched them weigh it and inspect it and offer him a price. And he said yes. He said yes to $48,000 for something that meant more to me than any amount of money in the world. I sat in his car for a long time just holding that receipt. The garage smelled like gasoline and dust and something else I couldn't name. I thought about Daniel, about what he would say if he knew, about how he trusted Eric more than anyone, about how we both did. And then I realized something terrible. Vanessa may have pushed him. Vanessa may have whispered in his ear and shown him pictures of resorts and talked about how much they deserved a vacation. But Eric chose this. He made the choice. He signed the paper. He took the money. I folded the receipt carefully and put it in my pocket and went back inside the house. Vanessa was on the couch scrolling through her phone again. She looked up at me and smiled and asked if I wanted lunch. I said no thank you and walked to my bedroom and closed the door. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and cried into my pillow so she wouldn't hear me. Not because of the ring, because my son looked at me in the hospital and lied. That night, after Eric and Vanessa went to bed, I took out an old manila envelope from the back of my closet. I had to stand on my toes to reach it behind the shoeboxes and winter blankets. The envelope was yellowed and the corners were soft from years of being handled. Daniel gave it to me about 6 months before he died. He was already weak then, already losing weight. But he sat me down at the kitchen table and put this envelope in front of me and said, "Don't lose this, Patricia. Promise me you won't lose this." I promised. Inside were trust documents and handwritten letters from Daniel's grandfather and one business card from an attorney named Michael Levinson. Most people in our neighborhood thought Patricia and Daniel Coleman were solidly middle class. We drove used cars. We shopped at discount grocery stores. We fixed things instead of replacing them. We weren't rich, not even close. But Daniel's grandfather was different. He owned a small manufacturing company back in the 50s and 60s, and he was smart with money in a way that skipped 2 generations. He quietly created a family trust decades ago and put certain assets into it. Not cash, not stocks, heirlooms mostly. Land that got sold later, and the diamond ring. My mother's ring was legally tied to the trust because Daniel's grandfather gave it to my mother as a wedding gift when she married into the family. It had been professionally appraised years ago for nearly $400,000. I barely understood all the paperwork myself. Daniel handled that kind of thing. He was good with numbers and legal language and all the small print that made my eyes glaze over. But one sentence stood out clearly even to me. Any direct heir who knowingly sells protected family property without written authorization from the trust executor forfeits all future inheritance rights. I read that sentence 5 times. Then I read it again. Then I set the paper down on my nightstand and stared at the ceiling for an hour. $400,000. That's what they sold for $48,000. They didn't even bother to get it appraised. They just needed quick cash for a vacation, and my son walked into the first pawn shop he found and took whatever they offered. I cried again, harder than I had at Daniel's funeral, not because of the money, because Eric never asked. He never called me in the hospital and said, "Mom, we're in a tough spot, can you help us?" He never said, "I'm sorry to do this, but we need money for bills." He didn't even make up a lie. He just took the ring and sold it and booked a flight to Cabo and posted pictures by the pool like he had done nothing wrong. Like I wouldn't find out. Like I was too old and too sick and too stupid to put the pieces together. I wiped my face and picked up the business card, Michael Levinson. The address was still the same after all these years. I decided I would call him in the morning, not for revenge, not to punish anyone, just to understand what my options were. Because for the first time in my marriage to Daniel, I realized something that broke my heart in a new way. He set up that trust to protect our family, and I was the only one left who could protect it now. 3 nights later, Vanessa ordered expensive takeout sushi to celebrate me feeling better. Her words, not mine. I sat quietly at the dinner table watching them eat and laugh and talk about nothing important. Vanessa had a new designer bag sitting on the floor next to her chair. Eric had new sneakers I had never seen before. They were spending stolen money right in front of me like they had already forgotten where it came from. I waited until they both had food in their mouths, and then I asked the question I had been holding on to for days. How was Cabo? The room went silent so fast I could hear the ice melting in Vanessa's water glass. She blinked first. What she said, Cabo, I repeated calmly. The resort looked beautiful in your photos. The pool looked lovely. Eric slowly put down his fork. The metal made a small sound against the plate that seemed louder than it should have been. Vanessa forced a smile onto her face, but I watched it crack around the edges. Oh, that trip, she said, her voice going higher. That trip was paid for months ago. I nodded softly and said, interesting. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the pawn shop receipt. I unfolded it slowly and slid it across the table toward Eric. It came to a stop right next to his plate. Vanessa's face lost all color. I mean all of it. She went gray like someone turned off a light behind her skin. Eric whispered the word mom like he was 7 years old again, and he had broken something and he didn't know how to fix it. I looked directly at him. Did you hold my mother's ring in your hand while they priced it? I asked. Did you watch them look at it under that little magnifying glass? Did you sign the paper yourself? Nobody answered. Vanessa opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Eric stared at the receipt like it might disappear if he looked hard enough. I stood up slowly from my chair. My stitches pulled, but I didn't care. I spent 40 years protecting this family, I said. Your father worked himself into an early grave protecting this family. He came home from work coughing and kept working anyway. He went to chemotherapy and came straight home to fix the leaky faucet. He loved you so much, Eric. So much, and you sold the last thing my mother ever touched. You sold it for cocktails and hotel photos and a pool you swam in for 3 days. Vanessa suddenly snapped. Her voice came out sharp and loud. We needed the money, she said. We deserved a break. You don't understand how hard things have been for us. I turned toward her slowly. No, I said, you wanted luxury. There's a difference. Eric covered his face with both hands and his shoulders started shaking. And for the first time since I came home from the hospital, my son cried. Not quiet tears, loud, ugly sobs that came from somewhere deep. Vanessa stood up and grabbed her bag and walked out of the house without looking back. The door slammed behind her. Eric sat there crying at my kitchen table with his face in his hands, and I wanted to comfort him because he was my baby, and that instinct never goes away no matter how old they get. But I didn't move. Because some lines you can't uncross. And my son crossed one the minute he took that ring out of my drawer. The lawyer's office smelled like leather books and old coffee, and the kind of quiet that makes you lower your voice even when you're alone. Michael Levinson was 81 years old now. His hair was completely white, and his hands shook a little when he reached for his glasses, but his eyes were still sharp. Still the same eyes that helped Daniel draft his will and set up the trust and explain everything to me in words I could understand. The second I placed the pawn shop receipt on his desk, his whole expression changed. He picked it up and held it close to his face and read every word twice. Then he set it down slowly like it might break. They sold the Harrison ring, he asked quietly. I nodded. Michael leaned back heavily in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a long time. They have no idea what they've done, he finally said. 2 weeks later, Eric and Vanessa arrived at Michael's office thinking I wanted a family discussion. That's what I told them on the phone. Just a conversation. Just a chance to talk things through with a neutral person. But when they walked through the door, they found legal documents waiting on the table. Vanessa started talking immediately. "This is insane," she kept saying. "This is ridiculous. It was just jewelry. It was a ring." Michael calmly adjusted his glasses and looked at her over the top of them. "No, Mrs. Coleman," he said. "Legally speaking, it was protected trust property." Eric looked confused. His face had that lost expression I remembered from when he was a teenager and got caught doing something stupid. "What does that mean?" he asked. Michael opened the file and pulled out a document with Daniel's signature at the bottom. "It means," he said, "that you violated the conditions of your family inheritance." The room went completely still. Then Michael read the number out loud. "Current trust value $2,800,000. Vanessa literally stopped breathing. I watched her chest freeze mid-breath like someone had pressed pause on her body. Eric stared at me in horror. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. And I finally understood something that broke my heart into pieces I didn't know existed. They never cared about the ring. They never cared about my mother's memory or my father's memory or Daniel's legacy or any of it. They only cared after they learned what it was worth. Michael explained everything slowly. The forfeiture clause, the legal process. The fact that Eric had signed a pawn shop receipt with his own name, which meant there was proof. Vanessa started crying, not sad crying, angry crying. She turned on Eric and started yelling at him in the lawyer's office. "This is your fault. You should have asked your mother first. You should have checked the paperwork." Eric yelled back, "You're the one who wanted Cabo. You're the one who said she would never find out." I sat there watching my son and his wife tear each other apart over money they never earned and a ring they never deserved. Michael glanced at me with something like pity in his old eyes. I didn't feel sorry for myself, though. I felt sorry for Daniel, for the trust he built to protect his family, for the son he raised who turned into a stranger. The next month destroyed everything. Vanessa blamed Eric for not checking the trust documents. Eric blamed Vanessa for pushing him to sell the ring. Phone calls turned into screaming matches that I could hear through the walls of my own house. Relatives took sides on Facebook. My sister Carol said I was doing the right thing. My brother Frank said I was being cruel and money was just money, and family was more important than some old ring. People I hadn't talked to in years suddenly had opinions about my life. Some called me a bitter old woman. Others said I was finally standing up for myself. I barely listened anymore because deep down I understood something none of them wanted to admit. This was never about the inheritance. Greed didn't create the problem. Greed just exposed what was already there. One evening, Eric came to my house alone. No Vanessa, no excuses, no phone in his hand for once. Just him and his exhaustion and the dark circles under his eyes that made him look 10 years older. He stood in my doorway and said, "I'm sorry," just those 2 words. Quietly, like he meant them. I looked at my son carefully. For the first time in months, he looked like the little boy I once knew. The one who brought me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day, even though it was just dry cereal and orange juice with too much pulp. The one who cried at his father's funeral because he didn't want to be the man of the house yet. I told him he hurt me more than he would ever understand. He cried again, not the loud sobs from the dinner table. Quiet tears that ran down his face while he stood in my doorway like a lost child. "I know," he said. Then he asked the question I had been dreading since the moment I found that receipt. "Can you forgive me, Mom?" I looked toward the hallway where Daniel's old coat still hung on the hook untouched for 8 years. Some betrayals happen suddenly. A fight, a lie, a stolen ring. Others happen slowly. One selfish decision at a time. One vacation. One pawn shop. One signature on a receipt. "I love you," I told him. "I will always love you because you are my son and that doesn't change." But trust is harder to rebuild than family. He nodded like he already knew that. Like he had been expecting those words and they still hurt just as much as he feared. He asked if he could come inside anyway. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat in the living room and didn't talk much. I made tea. He drank it. At some point, he fell asleep on the couch with his shoes still on, and I covered him with a blanket like I used to when he was young. I sat in my recliner and watched him sleep and tried to figure out where I went wrong. What I should have taught him that I didn't. What he should have learned that he forgot. By morning, Vanessa had texted him 17 times demanding to know where he was. He looked at his phone and turned it off and asked if he could stay for breakfast. I made him eggs. We ate in silence. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something, and something was better than nothing. 6 months later, I rewrote my will completely. Not out of revenge like some people said, out of clarity, out of seeing my family clearly for the first time in years. Part of the trust went to charity. A women's shelter downtown that helps mothers escape bad situations. Part went to cancer research in Daniel's name because I didn't want anyone else to watch their husband disappear the way I watched mine. And part of it I kept in a separate account for Eric if he ever got his life together and left Vanessa and learned what it actually meant to be a decent human being. But I didn't tell him that. He needed to figure it out on his own. One handwritten letter remained sealed for Eric with instructions that it could only be opened after my death. I wrote it on a Tuesday afternoon when the house was quiet and the sun was coming through the kitchen windows the same way it did when Daniel was alive. I told Eric that I loved him, that I always loved him, that his father loved him too and would have been disappointed, but would have forgiven him eventually because that's who Daniel was. I put a photo inside the envelope. Him as a child sitting on his grandmother's lap in her old rocking chair. She was laughing at something he said. Her hand was on his shoulder, and the diamond ring was on her finger. On the back of the photo, I wrote something I hope he never forgets. You didn't lose the inheritance when you sold the ring. You lost it when you stopped seeing memories as sacred. Money returns. Character doesn't. A few years later, someone told me the ring was never recovered. Some anonymous collector bought it overseas, and it disappeared into a private vault somewhere. Gone forever from my family. At first, that thought kept me up at night. My mother's ring sitting in some stranger's safe. Never to be worn, never to be passed down. But eventually I made peace with it, because I realized something important. The real heirloom was never the jewelry. It was the values my family failed to protect, the honesty, the loyalty, the understanding that some things are worth more than what someone will pay for them. I still live in the same house. I still water the same plants. I still dust the same photo frames on the fireplace mantel. Eric comes over for dinner sometimes, without Vanessa. They divorced about a year after everything happened. He's different now, quieter, more careful with his words. He asked me once if I thought his father would be proud of him. I told him the truth, not yet, but maybe someday. He nodded and said he was working on it. That's all I can ask for, that he keeps working on it. The heart monitor beeps somewhere in my memory now. Not the hospital, just the echo of it. The reminder that time is short and people are complicated, and love and betrayal can live in the same room breathing the same air. I kept my mother's promise for 23 years. I couldn't keep it forever, but I tried. And sometimes trying is all any of us can do.